Ellie's dress flowed like a white river as she stepped out of the car in front of the church. The afternoon sun reflected off the stained glass windows, casting soft hues on the stone floor. Outside, well-dressed guests chatted animatedly, waiting for the big moment. The wedding she had always dreamed of was about to take place. But something was wrong. Finn, her faithful golden retriever, was restless. He had been her companion for the past 12 years, always by her side through joy and sorrow. That morning, when Ellie woke up, she had expected him to be excited. Yet instead, he remained lying next to the bed, looking at her with deep, tired eyes. Now, in the churchyard, Finn blocked her path. With his muzzle gently resting against her leg, he let out a small whine, almost imperceptible, but filled with something that made Ellie's heart tighten. "Finn, what's wrong, boy?" she asked as she knelt down, ignoring the curious looks around her. The dog did not wag his tail. He just stared at her, his eyes conveying something words could not express. Ellie stroked his golden fur, now with a few strands of gray. He was warm, too warm. "Ellie," Nate's voice sounded behind her. Her fiancé approached with a worried smile. "Is everything all right?" Ellie looked at him, then at Finn, and felt her heart squeeze even more. Something was wrong. "He isn't well." Nate knelt beside her and gently touched Finn. Noticing the dog's breathing was faster than usual, his expression changed. "He needs a veterinarian," Ellie said firmly. "But now, the ceremony is about to begin." Ellie lifted her gaze, feeling the anticipation all around. The guests watched the scene in silence, some whispering, others clearly not understanding. Her father stood at the church door, frowning in confusion. The soft piano music was already echoing inside. But none of that mattered. She looked at Finn, the dog who had been by her side throughout her adult life. He had been there when she lost her mother. He was there when she landed her first job, and when she thought she'd never find love. He was there on the night Nate proposed, watching with his wise, faithful eyes. Now, he was asking something of her, and Ellie knew she could not ignore him. "I can't leave him like this," she said, finally rising to her feet. Nate watched her for a moment, then sighed and smiled gently. "Then let's take him." The shock on the guests' faces was evident as Ellie, still in her wedding dress, grabbed Finn's leash and walked back to the car. Nate followed without hesitation. Her father tried to intervene, mentioning something about the timing and the importance of the moment, but Ellie simply held his hand briefly. "He's always been by my side. Now, let's my turn be by his." And then, without looking back, she left. The veterinary clinic was quiet as Ellie and Nate rushed in. The receptionist raised her eyebrows at the sight of a bride carrying a dog in her arms, but asked no questions. "He has a fever," Ellie explained while the veterinarian, Dr. Collins, examined Finn with a keen look. The clock on the wall ticked every second as if weighing tons. Ellie held Nate's hand, her heart racing. Dr. Collins finally straightened up and sighed before speaking. "Finn has advanced heart failure." Ellie's world stopped. She blinked several times, trying to absorb the words. "What?" But he was fine. He was fine until yesterday. This kind of condition can worsen suddenly, especially in older dogs. He was probably hiding the symptoms until now. Ellie felt tears stinging her eyes. "Is there anything we can do?" Dr. Collins nodded kindly. "We can administer medications to keep him comfortable, but honestly, we're talking months, maybe weeks." The reality of the situation crashed over Ellie like a tidal wave. Finn had interrupted the wedding because he knew something was wrong. He didn't want her to walk away at that moment. She ran her fingers through the dog's golden fur, feeling his breathing weaker than she wished. "Thank you for warning me, boy," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. Beside her, Nate squeezed her hand. "We're going to keep him," he said without hesitation. And at that moment, Ellie knew with absolute certainty that she was marrying the right man. The veterinary clinic seemed suspended in time. The sound of clocks ticking, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the lavender scent of Ellie's dress, the weight of Finn's faint breathing. Everything moved in slow motion. Ellie felt her heart heavy as she caressed Finn's head. Her mind raced, trying to process the news. The dog who had been by her side for more than a decade, who had grown up with her, was leaving. "Can we take him home?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. Dr. Collins nodded. Yes, of course. I'll prescribe the medications to help him feel better. He needs rest and lots of affection. Ellie nodded, blinking rapidly to hold back her tears. Thank you, doctor. She turned to Nate, expecting to find worry in his eyes. Instead, she saw understanding. What are we going to do now? He asked, and Ellie knew that this wasn't a question about the logistics of the moment. He was asking about everything, about the wedding, about how they would handle this together. Ellie took a deep breath and looked at Finn, who now watched them with sleepy, trusting eyes. We're going home, she said. Ellie's house had always been a haven of love and memories. Every corner held a piece of her history with Finn. The worn carpet in the living room where he chewed his toys as a puppy, the stain on the hallway wall where he rested his muzzle when he wanted attention. When they arrived, Ellie carefully placed him on his favorite bed in the living room, near the window where he loved to lie and watch the world go by. The white dress, which once symbolized the most important day of her life, was now wrinkled and soiled, as if reflecting the turbulence of her emotions. Nate sat beside her on the floor. I know this isn't what you planned for today. Ellie let out a weak laugh. Nothing about today went as planned. She looked at Finn, who now breathed slowly but peacefully. But I don't regret anything. Nate took her hand and squeezed it gently. Neither do I. At that moment, the front door opened. Ellie. It was her best friend, Emily. Behind her were her parents and, to Ellie's surprise, the wedding minister. What are you all doing here? Ellie asked, quickly standing up. Her mother held her hands, eyes brimming with tears. Sweetheart, everyone at the church understood what happened. You did the right thing. But Sophie had an idea. Ellie looked at Emily, who smiled gently. If we can't have the wedding in the church, how about having it here? Ellie's eyes widened. Here? Yes, said the minister, smiling kindly. If you'd like, we can perform the ceremony right now with Finn by your side. Ellie felt a lump in her throat. She looked at Nate, who already had a smile on his face. What do you think? Ellie looked at Finn. Her old friend watched them, his tail wagging slightly. It was as if he knew what was happening. And then, for the first time that day, Ellie truly smiled. Let's do it. The living room was quickly transformed. Candles were lit, flowers were brought from the church, and the few guests who had come waited eagerly. Ellie didn't worry about changing her dress or fixing her hair. None of that mattered now. She held Nate's hands, and the two stood before the minister, with Finn lying between them. We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Ellie and Nathan, began the minister, his gentle voice filling the room. And, above all, to recognize that true love doesn't need a perfect place or a perfect moment. It only needs two people willing to choose each other every day. Ellie felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked at Finn, who watched her with the same loyalty as always. When it was time for the vows, Ellie took a deep breath. Nate, today wasn't as we expected, she said, her voice choked. But looking at you now, I know it couldn't be more perfect. Love isn't found in an immaculate dress or a crowded church. It's in the hard moments, in the sacrifices we make for those we love. She looked at Finn. You've always shown me what true love is, boy. And I know that this love will continue to live on in me and in you, Nate, always. Finn let out a small sigh, almost as if in response. When the minister declared them husband and wife, Ellie felt a wave of peace wash over her. She and Nate kissed, sealing the most meaningful moment of their lives. And in the background, Finn wagged his tail one last time. That night, the house was quieter than usual. There was no music, no party, no dancing. The grand reception hall, the planned speeches, and the first dance were behind them, replaced by something much more intimate. Ellie, Nate, and Finn sitting on the living room floor, sharing an impromptu Chinese takeout dinner. Ellie's dress was now stained with a bit of sweet and sour sauce, but she didn't mind. Everything felt more real, more meaningful than any elaborate banquet could have been. Finn lay between them, his breathing light, his eyes blinking slowly, tired but content. I think this was the most unusual wedding anyone has ever seen, Nate said with a playful smile as he reached for another spring roll. Ellie laughed softly, running her fingers through Finn's fur. And also the most perfect. They sat in silence for a moment, simply enjoying the tranquility. The gentle glow of the fireplace illuminated the room, casting soft shadows on the walls. Ellie looked at Finn, feeling a pang of sadness in her chest. She knew that this moment was precious because their time together was coming to an end. "I don't know how I'll go on without him, Nate," she finally said, voicing the fear she had tried to ignore. Nate set aside the takeout box and held her hand. "You don't need to think about that now. Let's just be with him. He knows he's loved." Ellie nodded, blinking rapidly to push away her tears. Finn lifted his head slightly and placed a paw on her leg, as if to say that everything was all right. And at that moment, she knew he understood everything. The following days were a mix of gratitude and farewell. Ellie and Nate decided that every moment with Finn would be cherished. On good days, when he had enough energy, they took him to the park where he had always loved to run. Finn could no longer chase squirrels as he once did, but he still enjoyed feeling the wind on his face and smelling the trees around him. On bad days, Ellie would lie next to him on the living room rug and just hold him, feeling his breath against her skin, memorizing every detail, every strand of his golden fur, every look filled with affection. Ellie's friends visited frequently, bringing treats for Finn and recalling funny stories from the past. "Remember when he stole an entire sandwich from my hand and ran through the house?" Emily said, laughing as she petted his head. "Or when he dug a huge hole in the garden because he thought there was a buried treasure?" Nate added. Ellie laughed despite the pain in her chest. He always had a free spirit. Finn wagged his tail weakly, as if in agreement. And so, the days passed. Some were happy, filled with memories and love. Others were difficult, with the weight of goodbye becoming more and more real. But Ellie knew she was doing the right thing, because Finn was surrounded by love, the same love he had always given her. One cold spring morning, Ellie knew it was time. Finn did not get up to greet her, as usual. His breathing was slower, and his eyes, once bright, now held a deep weariness. Ellie knelt beside him, cradling his face in her hands. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, feeling tears start to roll down. "I'm here." Nate knelt beside her, placing one hand on Ellie's shoulder and the other on Finn. "You were the best friend anyone could have, Finn." Finn's eyes met hers one last time, full of tenderness and understanding. His body relaxed slowly, and he let out a soft sigh, as if he were finally at peace. And then he was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ellie felt as if the world around her had stopped. She buried her face in Finn's fur, quietly crying, feeling as though a piece of her heart had been taken away with him. Nate held her, embracing her tightly, while silent tears streamed down his face as well. Time passed slowly that day. Ellie didn't know how long she stayed there, holding Finn, unable to accept that he was no longer there. But deep down she knew he had left in peace, that he knew he was loved, and that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, the house felt strangely empty. The silence was deafening. Ellie still expected to hear the sound of Finn's paws in the hallway. She still hoped to see him lying by the window, but he was no longer there. She found comfort in the little things, in the scent of the blanket that still held a trace of his perfume, in a collar hanging on the wall, in photo albums full of happy memories, and, above all, in the love he left behind. One night, while gazing at the stars from the porch, Ellie felt a gentle breeze pass by her, and, for an instant, she had the sensation that Finn was still there by her side, and maybe in some way he was. The months following Finn's passing were a mix of acceptance and longing. Some days were easier, filled with happy memories, while others were heavy, full of silence and the void he left behind. Ellie never imagined that the absence of a dog could be so painful. Coming home and not being greeted by an excited wagging tail, not hearing the sound of paws on the wooden floor, not feeling that attentive gaze, always watching her, always present. The pain of loss came in waves. Sometimes she caught herself smiling as she remembered one of Finn's many mischiefs. Other times, the crying came unbidden in the middle of the night when she rolled over in bed and realized he was no longer there. Nate stood by her through it all, patient and understanding. "He never really left us," "Ellie," he would say, holding her hand. "Finn will always be here." And Ellie wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that, in some way, Finn was still walking by her side, invisible to the eyes but present in her soul. Yet, something inside her still felt incomplete. Then, on a rainy autumn day, Emily appeared with an unexpected idea. "Have you ever thought about visiting the animal shelter?" she asked, sitting beside Ellie on the couch with a hot coffee in hand. Ellie frowned. "About adopting another dog?" "You don't have to adopt," Emily said with a shrug. "Maybe just to help out, to spend some time with them. I know you miss having Finn around." Ellie hesitated. The idea of having another dog felt wrong, as if she were betraying Finn's memory. But, deep down, she knew that what truly frightened her wasn't replacing Finn. It was opening her heart again. After much thought, she decided to try. The animal shelter was small but warm. The smell of dog food and hay filled the air, and the sound of barking echoed through the halls. Ellie walked among the kennels, observing each dog carefully. There were playful puppies, alert adult dogs, and a few older ones lying in their corners, waiting for someone to choose them. Then, at the end of the hall, she saw him. It was an elderly golden retriever, his golden fur streaked with white around his muzzle. His eyes were calm, serene, and when he saw her, something sparkled in them. Ellie stopped. For a moment, it felt as though time had stopped. She knelt slowly, extending her hand. The dog raised his head with effort and took a small step forward, resting his muzzle on her palm. Ellie felt a lump in her throat. He wasn't Finn. He never would be. But somehow, that dog awakened in her the same sense of love, of belonging. "His name is Buddy," said a volunteer beside her. "He's 10 years old. He was left here after his previous owner passed away." Ellie felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked at Nate, who watched the scene in silence, a small smile on his lips. "What do you think?" he asked. Ellie looked at Buddy again, and at that moment, she knew she was ready. That night, Buddy lay down for the first time on Ellie's living room rug. He looked around, settling slowly, as if trying to understand whether this was truly his new home. Ellie sat beside him, running her hand through his soft fur. He closed his eyes and sighed, relaxing. Nate sat next to her, watching silently. "He feels safe with you," he said softly. Ellie smiled. "I think I needed him too." She glanced at the shelf where Finn's collar still hung. Finn could never be replaced. The love they had shared would always be unique, eternal. But at that moment, Ellie realized that love is not something that is lost. It's something that grows, that transforms. And Finn, wherever he was surely happy for her. Buddy opened his eyes, lifted his head, and licked her hand, as if confirming that thought. And Ellie, finally, felt her heart at peace. Did this story of love, loyalty, and new beginnings move you? Then don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories filled with deep feelings, meaningful connections, and unforgettable lessons.